Welcome to Down to Earth Astrology and Primal Girl Wellness. This is Miss Jenny and I am your astrologer. This series of videos will be about synastry and also murder charts, looking at the connections between murderers and their victims, or potential murders and the victims. And understand that this currently with the Idaho 4, this is an ongoing investigation. Nothing said in this video is a confirmation of guilt or innocence on anyone's part. It is purely speculation and observation based on what we know about astrology. This may be a lengthy video, so do not be surprised if it is cut into separate videos. So we may have breaks at the end of each segment and then a whole new video following it. All right, let's get on with it. All right, so this is the murder chart. Now they're saying they believe the murder occurred between a little after 4 and 4:25 a.m. Which is really pretty impressive because they're saying 4 adults on 2 different floors of a house in the dark were murdered in less than half an hour. That's impressive. I didn't know they made cocaine so strong. Anyway, so the thing about it, you guys got to know, take this with a grain of salt, because murder charts, we typically don't have murder charts. We don't know when murders actually occur. We don't have access to surveillance videos where we're actually witnessing a murder take place, where we've got date and timestamps on the video. So this is unique. So I'm literally guessing here with what I do know. So let's see if we can make something sensible out of these constellations as we're looking at it for the estimated time of the murder. So the first thing, and also to remember, it's estimated, so this ascendant, and the angles are going to move back and forth a few minutes. Not going to make a big deal, except some of these planets are so close to house cusps that a few minutes will move them around in the house. So we're not going to use them so closely. So the big things I want you guys to see. The first thing is Zeus is very close to the ascendant. Zeus is the asteroid, or trans-Neptunian, I should say. It's the trans-Neptunian that has to do with a release of great force, a sudden burst of force, power, right? Like rockets get launched with Zeus, and also a lot of physical power, which would make sense if you just murdered 4 adults in 2 different bedrooms on 2 different floors of a house in the dark by yourself with a knife. That's a lot of force. And in less than half an hour. The moon is typically the timer in the chart, so we tend to look at the moon, see if it gives us any detailed information. The moon is here. The moon is conjunct Kronos and Hades. Kronos has to do with excellence, somebody who's excellent at something, right? The measure of superiority in something. Hades has to do with the underworld and criminal activity, and certainly murder would come in there with the underworld and criminal activity. But Kronos is a little confusing because Kronos is the timekeeper. Kronos is about superiority, excellence, the highest gold standard you can achieve, which is kind of weird, right? Like, what does that have to do with this? Well, you know, I'm wondering, and I could be wrong, but I'm wondering if this person that we're looking for is someone who has received trophies or rewards or acknowledgement for being excellent at what they do, and possibly even when it comes to knife work. This may be somebody who's worked on a farm, or who's worked in a packing plant, like dressing meat or whatever that they do when they skin animals and chop them up like butchers. So, but this would be somebody who's very well, who at some point was recognized for their excellence at these things, which is kind of scary, right? Now, we also have Pallas Athene, which is another asteroid right there near the midhaven, give or take, depending on what time this actually occurred. Pallas Athene rules women. It also rules justice, the legal system, crafts, arts, wisdom, and pointy things, spears, knives, things of that nature. So it's a very clear and ironic picture. It's a very good reflection of the knife that we've got Pallas Athene near the midhaven. Now, some of the things that I thought were notable about this murder, air quotes, chart, right? Pluto, which rules the underworld and also great, tremendous force. Remember, we talked about Pluto in those last degrees, right? This is literally something that has reached the end of the line. This is it, buddy. We've hit, this is it, the end. It is opposing that moon, Kronos, Hades. So whatever this has been a long-standing, long-simmering issue. This is not something that erupted overnight. Whatever this thing is that drove someone to commit murder, to bring this to a completion of a situation, this has been a long-standing, long-simmering kind of thing. And also Pluto with the moon and Pluto with Kronos and Hades, certainly Hades and Pluto, definitely suggest revenge. This was something, what is it they say, a long time coming, long time coming. And Pluto is definitely an almost exact opposition to Pallas Athene, so the hunter, the huntress. Okay, I'm telling you, there's something. I bet you whoever they're actually looking for, I would bet you good money has received at some point in her life trophies or awards for excellence. That's something that has to do with knives or butchering. So it could be either they worked on a farm or in some type of meat processing plant or something like that, where they're slaughtering meat, or a hunter, huntress sort of stuff. But again, I'm speculating here, so take it for what it's worth. Now, the other thing that's interesting about the murder chart is, and unfortunate, is we've got a grand trine with that moon with the first house ruler, right, Venus. Or if you want to use the 12th house for hidden enemies as the ruler of the murderer, that's still here because Mercury is with the Venus right there, right, and sets up a grand trine with Jupiter and Neptune. This suggests that the person would have been successful in their endeavor with lots and lots of protection, lucky breaks sort of stuff around them. And unfortunately, that's kind of the way it's looking right now. So there's that. Now, some other things with this murder chart, one of the things that I was looking at is back in October, there was an eclipse at 2 Scorpio with conjuncting the planet Venus. In this chart, that eclipse, right, conjuncts Apollon in that first house. Apollon has to do with multiples and commerce and money. So again, something to do with possibly money. I can't imagine. But Apollon also rules, well, it's commerce, things that have to do with the marketplace, right? So I don't know what that means, but it's there. Also, November 8th, which is just a week before this murder occurred, so this would have been under the auspices of this eclipse. The eclipse took place at 16 Taurus, and it's conjuncting Uranus. The eclipse was conjuncting Uranus at the time that it kicked off, and what we got out of this is a murder, right? So this also too, this Uranus eclipse conjunct Uranus, was absolutely pulling in that Mercury and Venus. So, I mean, at this point, we're just rattling off a bunch of aspects. It doesn't actually mean anything. But again, it's a murder chart, so we're literally talking our way through it right now. Now, this also, look right here, this eclipse conjunct Uranus that sets off this murder chart squares Saturn. Saturn, we know, is potentially the co-ruler, because it's the ancient ruler of the ascendant, if we use the first house as the perpetrator, the person committing the murder, initiating the act. Saturn would also be their ruler. This eclipse with Uranus squaring Saturn would suggest, again, this business about being the outsider or being part of the out group instead of the in group. This is somebody, isolation, right? Being forced out, somebody who's not welcome, somebody who's been pushed out of the group. And again, whatever it is, these resentments and issues have been a long time coming. So this has been building for quite some time, which would imply a long-standing relationship between these people. And certainly more than a long-standing casual one. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. So there's your murder chart. So for those of you who really want to go down the rabbit hole and have a little fun here, there is a thing in astrology where sometimes they will use the named asteroids and plug them into a chart to see where they pop up. And they can be very surprising in their exactitude where the chart itself is concerned. So for grins and giggles, I put in all the roommates' names, Zana, Kaylee, Maddie, Bethany, Dylan, and Ethan, to see where they popped up on the murder chart. Now, some things you should understand about using named asteroids: we don't always get an exact match. Sometimes we have to get as close to the given name as possible. So for instance, there's no named asteroid named Zana, so we have to go with Xenia or Xenia. because it's the closest we could find. And with Maddie, it was Maddie Lee, I believe, was the closest match. Maddie Ball. That was the closest we could find to Madison or Maddie. And Ethan is apparently a very common name. So Ethan comes up all over the place. So I picked the best one out of all of them. But even with that, you'll look in the chart, you can actually see that Ethan shows up multiple times and has connections to the other planets and named asteroids. So, oh, and I put Bryan's name in here as well. Now, Bryan has a distinct spelling. It's Bryan, so his was, it was convenient because that named asteroid with that unusual spelling is in fact in the directory. So here's what we find. So the first thing is Ethan shows up close to the asteroid Cayley. He also shows up close to the asteroid Madison. And I would expect, I mean, if we're going to go literally with these asteroids, that Ethan had a very close relationship or was very friendly with Madison and Cayley. Zana, interestingly enough, comes up connected to Bethany. So Zana is here next to the asteroid Funk, which would be Bethany's last name. And also here, they've got a nice sextile going. So I would expect, surprisingly, that Bethany and Zana would have been friends, close friends. The only thing I can find is that they were in fact sorority sisters, but they may have had a good friendship separate from just being sorority sisters. So she would have been closer to Bethany than she would have been to the other girls. Kaylee and Maddie are not close to each other. They're semi-sextile each other, and those two have an unusual relationship. We're gonna get into that in a second. So no new news to report there. What I did find interesting is that Dylan shows up in here, and Dylan is opposing the named asteroid for Kaylee. So I'm wondering if Dylan and Kaylee didn't really get along, or if there was some jealousy between the girls going from one to the other. I mean, it's hard to say who would be jealous of who at this point because one's not here to speak for herself. But there's typically with oppositions, there's conflict and taking kind of a competitive or opponent sort of position with the other person. So I don't expect that Dylan and Kaylee would have necessarily been that close. There may have been some jealousy if we went with just the named asteroids and took them literally. Now, with all of that said, the last person we'll have to plug into this chart is Bryan. Bryan is over here. And what's interesting about Bryan in this chart is that Bryan doesn't really have a lot of connections to anybody in this chart. If anything, the one connection he has is over here with Ethan, and it's a supportive aspect. It's a sextile. Bryan and Ethan would have, in theory, gotten along fine or well. This is not somebody that would have pushed his buttons, as it were. So that's interesting. Now also note too that Bethany is conjunct Mars in the murder chart. Mars is the murder weapon, and it's also the murder itself. And Bethany is conjunct Mars. So I wouldn't take this too literally. I don't think Bethany committed the murder. However, it is entirely possible that Bethany has more information about the murder or the murder weapon or some connection to the murder weapon than is being told. There's a lot of questions about these two girls and why they managed to survive, and also the tall tales the other one is telling in her testimony to police, why the police haven't investigated this further. There's a lot going on here that's raising more questions than answers. So we'll see how that plays out.
Hey, since this video was started, Mars turned direct, and the affidavit of probable cause is released under the Mars station. And as we predicted, this Mars station has provided some information that is really upending the game table. So the game has changed. The game has changed. So, in brief, and certainly you can make of it what you will, remember in the original reports, the two surviving roommates out of a house full of 6 people, 4 people were killed and the other 2 were left miraculously alone as if they were never there. So, in the initial reports, after the day of the murder, what we were told, right, is that one, the surviving roommates couldn't rouse their other roommates, so they called their friends to help them. Um, Now, the question is, like, did they or did they not see the dead bodies? So I'm kind of thinking if people are dead, that's probably why they're not responding to you. So they called their friends first, then they called 911. And when the police arrived, everybody was hysterical. One of the girls supposedly passed out in the front yard. And that was the end of that. Of course, what we don't have are the cell phone records for these calls, and the 911 call transcript is conspicuous in its absence in this affidavit. So we don't know what time they called their friends for unknown reasons. We're assuming to help them rouse the dead roommates. We don't know how much time passed. This is important. We don't know how much time passed between the time the phone call to the friends was made and the phone call to the police or 911 was made. Because there is certainly great suspicion that the call to the friends first was to get contraband out of the house before police officers showed up and started poking around. Now, also too, this suggests that the girls did in fact see that there were dead bodies in the house. You know, that's a lot of blood, kind of hard to miss. And also too, like if you're not able to rouse or get your roommates to respond unless they're blocking the doorway, like usually we just figure they're sleeping it off because it's still only afternoon. And also too, remember there's two sets of roommates on two different floors that we're talking about. So were they calling the police because they couldn't get any of the four people to respond? Were they all blocking the doorway that they couldn't get in and see what was going on? Just saying, because if your roommate is not responding and you know that they were normally up at this point in time, anybody and everybody would knock and then let themselves in or peek in to kind of check to see if everything was okay. So we don't know what happened here. There's a whole lot of stuff that's not being told. Now, in the affidavit, since then, the affidavit says that this Dylan Morganson, I think that's her last name, told the police officer that, make sure I get this right, during the night, sometime around before or after the DoorDash delivery that Zana had ordered at 4 a.m., Dylan supposedly heard someone say, there's someone in the house. Now, other reports have said from people who supposedly lived in this house before, because it's off-campus housing, that on that first floor, like you could literally, you would sleep through a bomb drop upstairs. You wouldn't hear it, right? It's very, very insulated in terms of sound. So if somebody's saying there's someone here and she's hearing them say that, this suggests either that person was right outside their door or they were screaming it, you know, at which point we should maybe have heard that in the surveillance audio from next door. Just saying. So she opened the door, looked, didn't see anything, and then the second time she said she thought she heard crying. Now, crying is going to be a lot softer than somebody shouting "there's someone here," if they shouted it. But she says she heard someone crying and opened the door and didn't see anything and shut the door again. And the third time, she supposedly opened the door and, for whatever reason, and there was this masked figure dressed all in black. You know, it was very athletic with big bushy eyebrows. You know, was walking towards her and then like walked away, right? And she said she was so freaked out as she shut the door and locked it, right? And then what? Went back to sleep for 6 hours? I'm okay. Um, and he was close enough for her to see that he had bushy eyebrows, but she couldn't see an eye color. And remember, the house is dark. It's like 4:30 in the morning. All the lights are out. Like people aren't tripping around houses trying to murder people with the lights on in the middle of the night. Like the lights are out. It's dark. So locks the door, doesn't open it again until the next day, and then she's calling the police about an unresponsive roommate. Unresponsive because they're dead. So things are a little weird here, right? So the thing about it is, you know, listen, for all you people out there like, oh, don't trauma shame her. This is not trauma. This is scary, right? Nothing happened. Nothing assaulted or attacked her in any way, like, or even threatened her. Like it was just scary, right? And I don't know a single person in that situation that would have, especially women, right, that would have seen some masked, dark figure wandering around the house at 4 or 5 in the morning, you know, that A, would have also been completely freaked out and shut the door and locked it, right? But once the shock wore off, every single one of us, as far as I know, we're going to call somebody immediately to have them come over and make sure that this person's not still in the house because we're not leaving until we know we're safe. And we're not waiting until the next day to call the cops and say there was someone in my house at 4 in the morning. So And this is even in a house that is heavily trafficked by, recreational pharmaceutical users. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Right? So, was she so scared and shocked that she passed out and then fell asleep? Or was she so stoned that she wasn't even sure she was seeing things? And of course, if she was, in fact, that inebriated or stoned, that's not something she's going to admit to the cops either. Right? Or is she making this up? I'm just saying. I'm just saying. So there's that. And yes, there is in fact a thing with trauma response or shock, right? Where it's fight, flight, or freeze. And when you freeze, typically what happens is you're so overwhelmed, right? You're so panicked, so overwhelmed that you become immobilized. You literally freeze in place. You can't do anything, up to including screaming, right, or responding, just kind of like you're just there waiting for this thing to end because you can't make anything move. Um, and questioning, but it passes and you get your senses back and then you do something, which is not go back to sleep for 6 hours and then call the cops because your roommates aren't waking up. Everybody's response to trauma is a little different, and sexual assault survivors say the same thing. Nobody responds to sexual assault in the same way. Some people respond in very odd ways, but that doesn't mean that it's any less traumatic. I get that. But I also know, having had this experience of being so panicked that I had the freeze response. I was in a position where I thought I was going to get hurt, in the dark by myself out on the sidewalk, literally right in front of my house, and I was a kid, right, and I couldn't scream. I literally opened my mouth and nothing was coming out for a good minute. So these things happen, but I also know from personal experience that these things wear off, and not 6 hours later wear off. So why is she not calling the police to say there's somebody in my house, something's wrong, please come check, make sure everything's okay? What are we hiding here? So this Mars station and this affidavit came out together. So that is the first of two shoes that will drop. So this is the first shoe dropping, and it has upended the game. So much so that apparently there is a man who is an expert in crime scene recreation who has joined the team to investigate this further. And it's not the prosecutor's team. He's joined the defense team. He has joined the team defending Bryan Kohberger, because even he knows there's something not right here. There's a whole lot not right. Because, with his expertise and his education and his skills, for him to get involved in this for free, pro bono, he has to be absolutely dead on sure that there's something rotten in Denmark. Because why else would you give your time for free to waste your time defending somebody who is clearly guilty? You wouldn't do that. And neither would he. So he has joined the team on Bryan's side to help figure out what exactly is going on here. So I'm not the only person who thinks they've got the wrong person. There's a whole lot more going on here. So that is where we're at now with the affidavit. And Dylan is looking more and more, and also Bethany is looking more and more like they know a lot more than they're telling. And there's a lot of questions about why local PD did not pursue this further. Right. There's a lot here that's coming out. And again, just like we said with the Smart Station, all the stuff coming out may not have anything to do with Bryan and everything to do with other people having their dirty laundry hung out on the line unexpectedly and all of a sudden. So let's keep an eye on that. And with that, let's get on with the video.